San Francisco. I know the rain is hard. I myself drove from the East Bay to get here. So thank you for coming. Those of you who are online, thank you for listening in today. We're very happy to have everybody both online and present here in the building. I have to thank a lot of people. My name is Terry Smoke, by the way. I'm a consultant. I work for DataSeudix, and I learned this process from John Braga, who has run these meetings for a very number of years. And without John, I could not have learned to do all this. So first of all, I want to thank John Braga for this. And then Clindata Insight provided MyLin to help with the registration. So when you registered for this conference, MyLin took care of it and all that. And I could not have done this without her help. I'm sure that MyLin must make Pong's job much easier to do. Thank you, MyLin, for your help, and thank you, Pong, for your support. Dave from TalentMine for your support too, and also Genentech for their support of this meeting. Everybody really pitched in and really helped to make this meeting work today. So our first presentation is going to be by Kevin Lee, who's the Director of Data Science for Clindata Insight. And his talk will be, how will the new FDA technical rejection criteria and rejection process impact CDISC data submissions? And just a little bit about Kevin. I've actually met him, and I've heard this presentation, similar one to it before. But Kevin has been in the pharmaceutical industry for more than 15 years, a very active CDISC user and a member of the CDISC Atom and Share team. Kevin has presented about 50 papers at various conferences, especially on CDISC implementation and submission. Kevin earned a MS in Applied Statistics from Villanova University, following a BS from the University of Pennsylvania. Kevin is a lifetime learner who loves to learn and share. So please welcome Kevin. He's going to be doing this remotely. So Maura, go ahead and have Kevin to present. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Can you hear me? Carrie?
Turn you on.
Yes, we can hear you.
And can you actually see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. And before we start, I'd like to take this time to thank Bay Area CDISC meeting group, especially Carrie, John, and Marlene, for inviting me to speak today. And actually, I'm honored to be speaking today. And at the same time, I apologize not being able to be there with you guys. Actually, as a matter of fact, we have a lot of snow in East Coast, which made me to be there more than ever. Before we start, we'd like to mention that this presentation does not really represent FDA policy and FDA thinkings, and not endorsed by FDA. I actually celebrate several holidays: Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, and Super Bowl. Yes, I watched the Super Bowl actually last Sunday. Well, there are not that many good commercials, but it was a really awesome game. I think that it was the first time, overtime at Super Bowl, and we witnessed actually epic comeback by Patriot. In the football game, let us imagine that you are offensive lineman at football. For those who do not know about football, the main job of offensive lineman is protect the quarterback. So now let's imagine that your quarterback is sacked because you fail to block. Just like what happened to Matt Ryan, and it actually started the epic comeback by Patriot. And even worse, your quarterback got injured or hurt because you failed to protect the quarterback. Now people notice your name because they know that you failed to protect the quarterback. Ironically, the best game day for offense linemen is that you protect your quarterback so well, nobody mentioned your name and nobody noticed you. I believe that offense lineman mindset applied to biometric department during FDA submission process. If we prepare a perfect submission package following FDA standards like CDISC and ECTD, FDA will not reject our submissions or ask a lot of questions to biometric department because of non-compliant FDA standard requirements. And nobody noticed biometric department during the process. So today's presentation will introduce new FDA rejection criteria and rejection process for CDISC data so that we, programmers and statisticians, could prepare the perfect submission package and nobody noticed biometric department because we did a perfect job. So our agenda starts with FDA current rejection process by introducing technical rejections and also refuse to file. And we're going to talk about how FDA will reject non-CDISC submissions by introducing technical rejection criteria for study data that just published by FDA, and also introducing rejection process for the CDISC data. And then we're going to finalize our presentation, introduce how to prepare and how to keep up with FDA update. Before going into FDA submission process, let's discuss about what are prepared by biometric department and what are submitted to FDA by biometric department. In the ECTD folder structure, we prepare ADAM dataset in SAS transport file format and ADAM define.xml and analysis data review guide in ADAM dataset folders. In the program folder, we prepare ADAM SAS programs and some TFL SAS programs. If it's legacy data, a legacy study, we also prepare legacy SAS transport dataset and legacy SAS program, some TFL SAS programs. For the STTM study folder, we prepare STTM SAS transfer file and STTM define.xml, STTM annotated blank case of form, and study data review guide. All this information, this clinical trial data for CDISC data, will be put into M5 in ECTD folder structures, but SEND data, which is going to be going to M4 non-clinical study folder, also contain SEND SAS transfer file, SEND define.xml, and non-clinical study data review guide. So let's see the current FDA standard review process. It is a 10-month review process, and once data is submitted, there are actually main 4 stages on FDA review process. First 14 days, FDA do process submissions, and up to 60 days, FDA do plan review. And then next 6 months, FDA conduct the review, and the last 2 months, FDA decide about that applications. In the first stage of process submission, which happened about first 14 days, once FDA received complete application through electronic submission gateway, FDA will perform technical validations. It happened first 3 days. And then if the application failed on technical validations according to ECTD validation criteria that we're going to talk about later in our presentations, FDA will reject these applications. During this time, FDA also establish review team and distribute the submission to review team. And also FDA confirm user fee payment. From day 260 in next stage of plan review, FDA ensure that application is complete and ready to inspect. And during that time, FDA also communicate with the sponsor any potential refuse to file deficiency and also any correctable filing deficiency. And about 60 days, FDA will make a filing decisions, whether they're going to refuse to file or file applications. During this time, FDA also organize review task, timeline, and schedule, and determine final review classifications, whether it's going to be priority or standards. Priority is going to be 6 months review time, and standard is going to be 10 months review time. So a lot of sponsors want to go into priority. For the next 6 months, FDA conduct a review whether they're going to confirm and validate sponsors' claim about the drug, safety, and also efficacy. And during that time, FDA also evaluate the labeling of the drugs. For the last 2 months, FDA conduct a wrapping meeting to discuss about any outstanding issue, safety, and also detailed labeling of the drugs. And finally, FDA will inform sponsor about their decisions, either regulatory approval or approval with conditions such as continuous safety studies or rejections. So right now, FDA have a 2 rejection process. The first thing is a technical rejections, and second thing is refuse to file. If you look at its timeline, technical rejection happens first day or 3, and the refuse to file is actually happen around day 60. So through this technical rejection process, FDA can reject submissions because of its technical deficiency. And this is actually based on this ECDD validation criteria. And then this criteria provides description of error and its severity level. As you see that there's a high and medium and low. And then high is a serious technical error, which prevent the processing of the submissions. And medium and low is a error that impact the readability, and also it cannot be determined without further investigation by FDA. There are actually about 150 ECDD validation criteria belong to these documentations, and FDA could reject the submission if high severity of ECDD validation criteria is detected in the submission process. So let's look at the example. This is actually new criteria just added by the FDA about the CDISC data. It has a number as a 1734, and its description is TS dataset must be presented for each study, and it is high. So this could be rejected by FDA if the application does not have these information. And then the problem is the sponsor has not submitted TS dataset. And then sponsor will have to resubmit application including TS dataset. During next stage, also will refuse to file the application if application is not complete and any potential or correctable deficiency cannot be easily modified or have not modified upon FDA request. And also application is not consistent with the regulatory practice. The example of refuse to file is that missing clinical trial data, or missing ISS and ISC informations, or missing any kind of statistical evaluation and require case forms. And also application is not really organized, and also problem with the hyperlink. It is why that we have to check the hyperlink over define.xml to make sure that the hyperlink is correctly linked to the dataset and also any kind of documentations. And data tabulation do not indicate the source of the data. And a lot of time, review guide actually is probably able to provide the traceability of where the data is coming from. And also essence of the protocol. And then failure to include the effectiveness of the drug, such as efficacy informations. And omission of clinical data, such as important variable, such as efficacy variable, and missing data set, and missing defended XML or PDF, or illegible case of form, and uncommon measure and food drugs. Excuse me. So if you look at the current FDA rejection process, when sponsors submit electronic application package to FDA, FDA makes sure that submission pass technical validation according to ECT validation criteria. If it doesn't pass it, the submission will be rejected by FDA for technical deficiency. If passed, then submission will be accepted by FDA, and FDA start reviewing the applications. And during this process, FDA also check whether application is complete for the review. If it's not, FDA refuses to file the application. When FDA rejects through technical validations or refuse to file, the sponsor needs to go through this whole stage once again. So if that application passed FDA check, then FDA will file the application, will start conducting the review. So now we have talked about current FDA rejection process, and then now let's talk about big change. So there's a big change in this regulatory process. Happened on December 17, 2016. All the clinical and non-clinical trial data studies starting after December 17, 2016 should follow CDISC compliant data. So question is, why that is so important? Actually, we asked this question to FDA. Will FDA reject if submission data does not follow CDISC standards? And their answer was yes. This is a very important message for the industry because FDA can reject the submission if submission does not follow CDISC standards. So next question is, how will FDA reject non-CDISC submissions? Whether they're going to use current rejection process that we talked about in early our presentations, or they're going to implement new rejection process. So last year in October, FDA released the document for technical rejection criteria for study data. And also they introduced rejection process for study data as well too. So let's go into that part. Basically, in this technical rejection criteria for study data document, FDA add 4 more rejection criteria to ECTD validation criteria that we talked about in our early presentation. Here's a 4 rule. First one is TS dataset must be presented for each study level. For CDISC data submission, DM and defended XML must be submitted for STTM and SEN data folder, and ADSL and defended XML must be submitted for ADAM data folder. And correct study tagging file tag must be used for all standardized dataset, and for each study, no more than 1 dataset or same type should be submitted as new. What that means for the last one is that you cannot submit 2 DM in the same STTM data folder. As you see that there's a too high about TS dataset, about DM and defended XML ADSL. What that means is that if the sponsor do not include this dataset, FDA will reject the submission at the technical validations. So why that FDA use ECTD validation criteria for study data rejections? What that means is that FDA will use current rejection process rather than a completely new rejection process implementations. As you talked about before, there are currently 2 rejection processes in FDA, technical rejections and refused file. And right now, FDA using TS dataset and DM and define.xml and ADSL for this technical rejection at this moment. So if you look at this rejection process for CDISC submissions, once sponsor submit this electronic submission package to FDA, FDA will check whether this submission conform to required standards, such as whether it include TS dataset or DM ADSL define.xml. If the submission, if it's no, then submission will be rejected by FDA and technical rejection for submission will be sent to sponsor through electronic submission gateway. If it's yes, and submission will be accepted by FDA, and then sponsor will receive third acknowledgement form from FDA also through electronic submission gateway. So that why TS domain is so critical. TS domain actually contains study start date. And as we all know that on 2016, December 17, any study starting after this date should follow CDISC standards. So TS domain could tell you whether your study could be legacy or could be CDISC data format. By the way, this study start date is the earliest date of informed consent date among any subjects. What about DM and define.xml and also ADSL and define.xml? For STTM and SEN data submission, DM and define.xml are the key validations. And also for ADAM submission, ADSL and define.xml are also key validations. So now let's imagine that you receive the technical rejections for submission from FDA because non-conformance with the standards. How are you going to respond to that? FDA will actually send technical rejection for submission through electronic submission gateway, and also they will provide ECTD validation criteria error number. For example, 1734 for missing TS dataset, so sponsor know that what they're missing, what is their deficiency. So sponsor need to correct the issue, such as adding TS domain, and resubmit the package. Let's look at the use cases. Let's say the sponsor submit the package without TS domain on 2017, January 20th. So it is first received date of submission is 2017, January 20th. Because we don't have a TS domain, so FDA reject these submissions. So now FDA have to resubmit the application with TS domain on 2017 on January 28th. Now FDA receipt date will be 2017, January 28th. So important part of this use cases, FDA receipt date of submissions. At the first submission, it was December 17, January 20th. But because sponsor need to resubmit, right now it's going to be 2017 on January 28th. This is a very critical because sponsor lose about 8 days for the submission process. What they mean is that sponsor cannot help the patient earlier, and then actually they lose money for those 8 days. Let us imagine that the drug is potential blockbuster, like $1 billion annual revenue. Then each day will probably cost about $3 million. So sponsor actually losing a lot of money because this technical rejection by FDA. Second use case is, let's say you do CD submissions. So sponsor submit CDISC data submission without DM on 2017, May 20th. And then it got rejected because we don't include a DM domain. So we have to, the sponsor need to resubmit this package with a DM on 2017, June 10th. Then right now, the receipt date is going to be 2017 and June 10th. So in this use cases, sponsor also lose about 20 days. We actually talk about 2 rejection criteria for CDISC data. But we all know that there are a lot more CDISC validation rules. I mean, CDISC just released, I think about last week, STTM version 3.2 conformance rule, and it has about 410 rules. And also, we also have add-on validation check. It also has about 174 rules. What about those? How are we gonna deal with those validation rules by FDA? If you look at technical rejection criteria for study data document, it says FDA may use RTF on electronic submission that does not have study data in conformance to record standards, specifically in FDA data standard catalog. So there is a chance that other standards, other validation rule could be applied into refuse to file document, which is not clear at this moment. There's a chance to do that. So now what will be coming next? Maybe more CDISC rejection rule will be applied or included ECD validation criteria, or will be included in RTF, or maybe FDA gonna implement additional rejection process just for the CDISC data. So in this kind of unpredictable environment, what do we need to prepare for now? So whether it is a legacy or CDISC data submission, we need to prepare TS domain, even though this TS domain only contained study start date. For the CDISC submission, DM and define.xml should be included, STTM and SEN data folder. And ADSL and define.xml should be included atom data folders. So what about in the futures? We continue to watch out FDA new update, such as whether new rejection rules are added or included in ECTD validation criteria or refuse to file document. And we also need to follow and keep up with the new update, since they will be coming, and also continue to train and educate our team for any ongoing new update. Just to be honest with you, it's much more easier to prepare data and document according to standard in study level rather than in submission level. It will be a lot more expensive and it will take a lot more time to do in later in the stage. Actually, a lot of people ask me or complain to me that there are just too many things that we, as a programmer and statistician, need to do. It takes a lot of time for us to prepare submission package such as SEND, STTM, ATOM, define.xml, and reviewer guide, or STT manual dedication forms. And more update and changes coming. It's just too many things to pay attention to and too many things to prepare. the reason that we prepare all these things is not that we're not busy. We are always busy. But the reason that we are preparing all this information in data and document is that when FDA see our data and document, we want them to clearly see what we have done, and so there will be no questions or rejection because of standard requirement. If there are any questions or rejection, FDA review process will be delayed, which means we cannot help the patients earlier, and also our company lose the money. So we want to make sure that no rejection to CDISC compliance issue, and at the same time, either no questions or as little questions possible from FDA related CDISC compliance issues. Because if we do that, that is going to be our best game day. Nobody noticed biometric department because we are doing perfect submission package. Let's kind of finalize our talk today. We understand about new FDA rejection criteria and process, and also we talk about how to respond and prepare if rejected. And we also talk about how to keep up and educated about upcoming FDA updates. If we all do this, and we could bring our best game day, because we prepare a perfect package, so there's no question and there's no rejection by FDA. So during this process, nobody noticed biometric department because our perfect submission package preparations. As you know that Clindata and also myself are very active in social media. So if you have any questions, you want to learn more about CDISC rejection criteria or any CDISC standard implementation, you can contact us through our email or website or Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. Once again, thank you for your time. And then not sure whether we have a time for the questions, but Kerry?
Yes, we have time for a few questions. Thank you, Kevin. So a great presentation, and I think some very useful information. Kevin will be a part of a panel at the end, but if you do have questions now, we can take a few. And we also have a person who's handling the online part of this, Maura Cush, and she'll be, for those of you who are online, there's a way you can submit questions, and Maura can come on and we'll get those questions also. So any questions from the audience on Kevin's talk?
We do have one question from an online person.
Okay.
So I'm going to unmute him because it's a lot going on in the question panel.
Okay.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So yeah, Kevin, thanks for the talk. I actually had a question. This is DJ from Gilead. So I guess I'm a little confused about the requirement of DM for legacy studies. So for studies that start before that 17th date, my interpretation of that check 1736 is that even for those legacy data sets for those legacy studies, there still needs to be that dm.xpt. And we had actually checked with the FDA and they had confirmed. And I guess I was just trying to see if, if maybe we're not reading something, or if you have a different, because it seems like your interpretation was this, that the DM was only for the non-legacy, right? So for the CDISC studies?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that TJ, thanks for the questions. I think a lot of time when I'm working for the CRO, and I'm even right now, and that we sometimes that actually FDA asks us to see this submission, even though it is not requirement at this moment. So it depends on your reviewer, but in terms of that current FDA standards or data standard catalog, DM or any kind of CDISC data format is now required if the study start before December 17 and 2016. But a lot of cases, it depends on the sponsor. It depends on your regulatory requirement or special regulatory reviewers.
So I guess in the criteria though, one of the checks, one of the 4 checks, is a high severity and talks about the need for a DM.XBT. Yeah,
that is for the CD submissions, not for that legacy studies.
Yes, did you read that somewhere in that rejection criteria? Because that's what we're trying to figure out, is that we didn't read that was restricted that way. Was that just sort of, your interpretation based on the different folks you're working with, or did you find that somewhere in the document?
Actually, that kind of is my understanding at this moment. I'm not sure whether it clearly said about it for the CDISC, but for the CDISC submission, that is our interpretation at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, a little bit more on that. Actually, this is John Ray. I know of a few people that the stuff that the FDA published has some profound ambiguities in it. And I think that's a good way of saying that. And I know several people who have written to CDISC Sub and others at FDA to see that you get some clarification on it. And it sounds like various sources have clarified things differently. So I think some of this just sort of remains to be seen.
Hi Kevin, this is Priyasha here from Genentech. When you say it's supposed to be this, when you submit the DM, it's supposed to be present along with the TS, but you also mentioned that TS containing only the start dates is enough. It doesn't sound like to be CDISC validation or FDA validation compliant when you say only the start date is enough in the TS if it is submitted. And how about the DM? Is the DM also needs to be 100% validation submissions during the first 3-day technical rejection, or is it reviewed at the 60-day technical review?
Actually, I don't really follow the question. So question is more about whether DMs are completely validated for even though it start before December 17, 2016. Is that the questions?
Yeah, I think the question, if I understand correctly, is whether or not the trial summary domain just has to include one variable, the study start date. Is that your question?
It's actually one row.
Yeah, one row.
One row doesn't mean CDISC or 100% validated,
right.
Compliant. So the CDISC validation has to be some 20 variables, all the 20 records. So if it is not there, then is it still compliant?
So I think we're confusing the difference between needing to be CDISC compliant based on submissions that come after December 17th versus the legacy studies that come before. eData replied to us very clearly twice that they are totally with SEND and STTM data for TS coming in with one row, having SSTT, DTC for STTM and STTDTC for SEND. And they were perfectly fine with that. You're right, it's not compliant, but it doesn't need to be if the data are legacy. But they do need that data set in order to determine if there needs to be future conformance checks done on that study. And that's the key thing. And I think the other piece to this process also is about just the process. What happens at FDA when your data arrives? It goes into Janus and a data fit tool, right? Well, if it goes into that and automatically runs a P21 submission, if DM's not there, it's going to fail. They don't know what to do with it anymore. They can't do their next step. What our understanding is if you provide that information, it just runs right through. It says, oh, legacy data, I don't do any of my other checks on it. If it's after December 17th, then it goes into that 30-day or 60-day, whatever, review to make sure that it is conforming. So that was our interpretation, and maybe, I mean, and that's based on several emails that have gone to eData over the past couple months, including, we went to a webinar with FDA people on October 12th, and during the question and answers, not in the slide deck, but during the question and answers, they absolutely said TS has to be there. Well, if TS is there, guess what? You're going to need a defined out PDF or something to tell you that it's there, right? Mm-hmm. So in order to get a defined out PDF, aren't you creating a defined out XML to get there? So it's very circular in our, but that was our interpretation of it based on all the communication that we've had. And our non-clinical team is up in arms with the submissions that's going in with 15 studies that have to be retrofitted.
Daphne, Gilead Sciences.
I'm sorry.
She knows this.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Kevin, before we move on?
Oh, actually, I actually agree with that thought, because when we attended FDA webinar, then they also mentioned that TS dataset for the study doesn't have to include all the things, but it should include a study start date. So that was FDA information, and then they didn't really clarify whether we need more information, such as a title or population number, things like that. No normal trial summary dataset have. But at the time that for the legacy submissions, it was starting the study before December 17 should contain TS status no matter what, and also have a study start date. That's the only thing they require at the time.
All right. Thank you.
We're going to actually have more time to discuss this later because there's another presentation that overlaps a lot with Kevin's, and then there's going to be a panel discussion after that. So we're going to have lots more time for sort of questions and back and forth.
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Kevin, and thank you for staying online. He's going to be a part of the panel discussion at the end. Our next presenter is Jane Lozano, who's a consultant with Eli Lilly. Her topic is the current state of study data standardization plan and legacy data conversion plan and report. Jane has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 22 years and is currently a consultant supporting these early phase trials in the autoimmune and oncology therapeutic areas. She has also supported late phase oncology trials and the creation of integrated databases for submission and other regulatory interactions. She has been a member of PhUSE since 2014, where she is a co-lead for the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards Working Group and a member of the PhUSE CSS Steering Committee. She is leading the project teams for the Study Data Standardization Plan and Legacy Data Conversion Plan and Report. So welcome, Jane, and go ahead.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. Do I need to be louder?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I'm fine.
You need to do full screen on your slide.
I will. Yes, I will do that. First, want to thank Carrie, Maura, and Dave, and also Lisa Brooks for suggesting that I speak on this topic. Thank you very much for allowing me to come into your webinar and your interchange and talk about a couple of things that is going on within PhUSE. I have to admit, DJ, I was happy to hear your voice, and I can figure out how to minimize this, or how do I, okay. No, I don't want to leave the webinar. How do I?
You're good, you're good. It's not showing on our screen.
It's not showing on your screen? Okay. Actually, and when
your slides are, you're good. Just go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yes, for the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards Working Group within PhUSE, I am one of the co-leads, and like I said, DJ, it is so good to hear your voice because he is the other co-lead for this working group. So I figure after it's over, if you have any questions, just go to DJ because he can help you. He's right there. But it is good to hear your voice, DJ. I just wanted to give you just a one slide on showing the different working groups that we have within PhUSE. There's 5, and then a steering committee. And if you're not familiar with PhUSE, it's actually mostly run by volunteers. We all have our day jobs, but then we also work on projects, which is creating templates or white papers or recommendations or completion guidelines and things like that. We work directly with FDA sponsors. We have our upcoming CSS, our symposium in March in Silver Spring, Maryland, the first 2 days of March 20th and 21st, and then the rest of the week is actually a CDISC interchange. If you haven't registered, please do. It fills up very fast. But these are the other working groups within PhUSE. And the one that I work with and DJ is optimizing the use of data standards. The two projects that I'm going to share with you more information is the Study Data Standardization Plan and the Legacy Data Conversion Plan and Report. The Study Data Standardization Plan is actually referenced in 2 guidances. One is binding, one is non-binding. However, we know that that is recommended, the Technical Conformance Guide. The binding one is the Providing Regulatory Submissions in Electronic Format. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. It talks about, and what I have up is coming straight out of the binding guidance that says we need to be able to share our plan standards with FDA early. It basically is saying you need to do it at the pre-IND stage or no later the end of phase 2. And the reason why is because they want to know what standards your studies are using. And I think it goes along with what Kevin was saying, is that if you have this type of a document and you share it with FDA, then they know what you're using. They know what standards you're using, what version, what model and IG that you're using. And you can have those discussions if you have legacy, and that's not going to be converted to standardized data. I heard someone from FDA at the last conference say, well, if it's talked about late, then it's too late. They want to know early. And it's a document, it's a living document. It goes all the way into submission, and it is updated periodically throughout the life cycle of the compound and shared with FDA at the appropriate time. But they want to know what we are using now and even what we plan on using in the future and what versions. And that shows that it's on page 10 of the guidance. It also continues saying that, as you can read, that they want data in a format that the agency can process, review, and archive. And they reference the data standards catalog. So anything that is not in the data standards catalog is considered legacy to them. It is not standardized data. And they look at that, and I actually had a plan that was submitted, and they responded back as in relationship to the data standards catalog and whether it was accepted or not. The guidance also indicates that sponsors can apply for a waiver from the requirements to use specific versions of the standards. I think sometimes people think, oh no, we can't do a waiver, we can't do a waiver, and that's not exactly true. But what they won't do is allow you to submit data that is in a standard that is not supported by FDA any longer. 311, the IG 311, that is no longer supported by FDA. They don't want to see that. Here's an example I think we've all seen, the data standards catalog that shows the different versions of SDTM that are supported when the support begins, when the requirement begins of when a study starts. We all, I think, know that 311 support ended in 2015. Coming up in March, support will end for the Define 1.0. These are the standards that FDA is saying that we need to be following. This is also part of the data standards catalog. I apologize for it being so big, but it shows from a terminology standards perspective what we should be using for CDISC terminology, MEDRA, WHO-drug, and there's a few others beyond that. LOINC and UNI and SNOMED I'm not familiar really with those. I don't use them. We haven't used those at Lilly, but these are the main ones that most people, what I've seen. The technical conformance guide goes into a little bit more detail about what goes in a study data standardization plan. It also indicates that if it's going to be part of an IND, it should be part of the general investigational plan. Otherwise, and we've interpreted that, is if it's not part of an IND, then it is a standalone document. You can put it as part of Type C briefing document, but it really is it should be a standalone document so that you can go back and update it periodically. You don't want to have to update a Type C briefing document just for the study data standardization plan, and the study data standardization plan can be submitted to FDA as a standalone document. The information that they want to see, as you can, is listed. They also had their own template, and it's still out on their site, and it'll probably be there until we finalize our deliverable. But they did come up with a version of their template because the group that I was working with, we weren't that far along yet. We did take some of the things that were in there and how the information they had in it and included it into the template that my team has put together. Says should be updated in subsequent communications. However, they don't want it every single time we start a study, we change the study status, something that was started or ongoing to completed. It has to be at the right time and working with regulatory as to when is the right time to submit it. From a PhUSE perspective, now I've been working on this since I went to PhUSE. I went to my first PhUSE conference and they needed someone to start working on this, and I thought, why not? Let's just dive right in, and it has been a very enjoyable experience. I have met so many people and networked with so many people, and am excited that I'm going to get to see people in March that I haven't seen for a year. The project team that I have is actually creating several deliverables: the template, completion guidelines, a sponsor implementation plan, which is really important. It helps guide sponsors or anyone else who's creating this plan on how to do it. It's not specific, it's very general, but we did use it. I did use this plan in order to implement it within Lilly. We have our own steps that we have to take, but it did help us decide and put that together. We also have a couple of example documents, because that's always good to see an example. You can see a template, but without seeing really good examples, then it's not, I don't think it's as meaningful as it could be. We have one for asthma, as I said, and then obviously oncology, which is a little different. We put one together for that. The current template and supporting documents are out on our PhUSE wiki, and I will put a caveat to that. Is the link here is to the deliverables that were used in FDA's FR notice for intent for review, and then also we used within our group and everyone in the group as providing comments back to my team. We have since met and updated the template. It's not on this site, it's actually on our meeting minutes site out on the PhUSE wiki. Some of the best practices and assumptions is that it should be shared no later than end of phase 2. You include completed, planned, ongoing studies, any types of integrations. Once again, it's part of the general investigational plan for INDs, or it is a standalone document otherwise. There is one SDSP per IND and indication, meaning you could have multiple INDs, and then you would have that same number of indications. I've worked on a compound where I created 3 because there were 3 different INDs, 3 different indications. The sponsor implementation plan, as I said, guides your sponsors, and the key to this is having an owner to it. Someone has to own it. Someone has to guide others in creating the document. Not that the owner has to have all the answers to it and has to know exactly what studies has what standards, but being able to work with the non-clinical, with the early phase, with the late phase, and being able to get that information, working with stats. Stats we didn't think should own it, or, well, it could be, let's put it that way. It could be a statistician. It just depends on how your organization is set up. Within Lilly, we have consultants or data scientists, and I am for early phase for autoimmune and oncology, and then there is a late phase counterpart. And then we have the whole non-clinical piece of it that I have to admit I know nothing about non-clinical. There's another group that can provide information about non-clinical, because this plan covers non-clinical, early phase, late phase. We need to be careful about when we share the SDSP. It's at key regulatory interactions, but it's also a discussion with regulatory. Regulatory has to know what is going on, not necessarily what is in the plan and how to interpret it, but when communicating with FDA, their name is in the plan, and they're the ones that put a marker in our calendar, and they're the ones that get any feedback from FDA. So we need to be very careful and always consider regulatory as far as when we should be sharing this document. Once again, we want to determine if it's going to be part of an IND or a standalone. We want to collaborate with the key contributors, non-clinical, early phase, late phase, and stress again how important it is to work with regulatory on sharing the document. The contents of the SDSP is, as you can see, we have various sections. These sections are to be in every SDSP. We do not want anyone to change or take out anything, because then that changes the section numbers, and it should be consistent. Our sections should be consistent with what we send in. I was at a CDISC interchange last year, and there was a comment made that with the reviewers' guides, that they see all sorts of versions of the reviewers' guides where sections are removed, sections are added, and then it's not consistent with, I know section 4 is where I list my studies and standards. And that's how we are approaching this, is that we should not change any of our sections. We also have key definitions in the section 1 that we spent a lot of time on coming up with. What is a planned study? What is a completed study? What's an ongoing study? And we need to keep those definitions the way they are. We got them from FDA guidance. The non-clinical section, and really the section 4, that's the meat. Excuse me, that's what FDA wants to look at. That's what they want to see. This is the non-clinical. I do know that there are going to be some changes to this. I'm not quite sure yet what they are, but there was a meeting, I think it was around October, November of last year, that one of my Lilly colleagues went to, and FDA was there, and she was sending me emails saying, this isn't what we want to see, or this is what FDA wants to see. Well, that's fine. Just let me know what you need it changed to, and there, I know the non-clinical folks are working on that. I assume that you still have a study identifier and a brief title. The study type comes from SEND, control terminology. I think where it's a little difficult is putting in a study start date, maybe a status, because some studies don't have, some studies it's in a notebook in order to get a study start date. It's just not there like it is in, on the clinical side. There are exchange standards and terminology standards, though, that need to be listed. Or if there's no electronic data, then we list no electronic data. But what version of, if you're creating SEND data, what version of the model and the IG? I do have the tumor XBT and the TS and define. And then from a terminology perspective, there's not a whole lot of terminology standards like there are for clinical. But what I have is listed, or if it's sponsor defined. The clinical section, and I had to use the whole page for this, has the same information, except for, as if we go back and look at study type, there is a study design. So this is all your early phase that happens in your first human dose, and then you go into your phase 2s and your late phase information that that goes into this section. There's an identifier, a title. The study design actually can come from clinicaltrials.gov, where it defines what an allocation, control group, intervention model, masking, and that's where actually the examples are really good to look at, because it can get confusing the first time you do one, but then once you look at an example and you go out to clinicaltrials.gov, it's not so hard. And then if there isn't out on clinical trials, you can go out and look at the protocol as well. The study status, that's where we have the definitions that we've got from FDA guidance that we do not want to have changed. Study start date, if it's a planned study, you put out your forecasted first patient visit. The exchange standards, this is your SDTM and your ADAM, or whether you have analysis legacy or tabulations legacy. If you plan to up version something, then we have a way to do that, where you can say up version to be decided and indicate what you're going to be up version to. Or if it's going to be up versioned in a pool, because you could have a study that you're not going to up version at the study level, but when you pull it together, integrate it. Or if it's already been up versioned, what is the date of that? What we've learned so far in actually submitting some of these and getting feedback from FDA is that if you started a study, let's say in 311, and it had been up versioned to 312, then FDA wants to see that. They want to see the original version and then when was it up versioned. From a terminology perspective, this is where there's more than there are for the non-clinical, but putting in what version of control terminology, and this is where you can, even if you don't know for a planned study, if it's a study that's planned 2 years from now, to put to be determined. But at least that is showing FDA that, yes, I am planning on using standardized data. What version of MEDRA, may not know what it's going to be in 2 years, or what version of WHO drug, and then LOINC, SNOMED, you have the NDRF and UNI, and there just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough space on this page, and I didn't want to break it up into 2 pages. One thing that we also do is have a row that will separate out the phase, the type of trial, and what indication. So for example, phase 1 interventional healthy volunteers, phase 1 interventional healthy volunteers and psoriasis patients, phase 1A, phase 2, and so on. This is how you can separate them out by indication. That was something that I think is part of the FDA's template, but we are showing it in a little bit of a different way. They actually, FDA's template separated out completed, ongoing, and planned into separate tables. We put it together in our template. Then from an integration perspective or a pooled perspective, we also have the opportunity to let FDA know what our intentions are in regards to pooling the data together for an ISS or an ISC. We have a status because it is possible that a integrated database had already been created, and we can share with them what those standards are. Or if we're planning, let's say you have an integration with studies ABC, and then you're going to add D and E at some point, then we provide that information. And the same thing as whether it's going to be up versioned, whether it was up versioned, and when. This, on the exchange standards, it's also part of terminology standards. There just wasn't enough room. And it's the same as above as well with the clinical, the text that we have on our template is also applied to the terminology standards. Because you could have a study that had a 52-week lock, for example, there was analysis done, but then in the final version, MedDRA was updated or 2-drug was updated. And we had to figure out a way to be able to show that. What is going on now with the plan is that I have reviewed comments. I have received comments from organizations and then within my own working group. We have updated our template and going to update the other deliverables, the completion guidelines, and the examples. And I want to get it to a state where when we go to PhUSE in CSS in March, that we just look at the comments that FDA has received from the FR notice for intent to review. They have said it takes 2 months to go through what those comments that they have received from that notice and then collate them and discuss them, and we will bring them into the CSS. And I do have time set up in March to discuss that. Once that is done, I really want to get it to a point where we can have it endorsed by FDA. We can put it out on the wiki where the reviewers' guides are, and they're versioned, and they will be in that same format. We are currently within the PhUSE steering committee are trying to figure out a versioning strategy, because we know that people have comments. Obviously, we've seen in reviewers' guides where people have added things because it wasn't there, and that's fine, but we're trying to figure out, well, do we follow along the same strategy that FDA has with the technical conformance guide of twice a year? Do we update it? That is something that we are tackling, and we have to get this tackled because of not only for the reviewers' guides, but now we have the study data standardization plan, and there's going to be another one coming up too, that we have to figure out how we're going to do this. FDA doesn't want to be involved in that. They want us PhUSE, do that part of it, and we're really trying to figure out, can we? First of all, is this the right thing for us to do, and how do we do it? So that is the update on the study data standardization plan. The next plan is the legacy data conversion plan that I once again volunteered for when I went to my first PhUSE. I was actually sitting in a working group for somebody who was sick and volunteered again, because then that way I knew I could go to PhUSE every year, but it was a way to get involved. And it's been wonderful getting involved with this kind of thing, because you have an opportunity to shape and to mold what goes into these. If you're part of the working group, you can say, and like Lisa and John, I was part of that. Now, I was part of the study data standardization plan, and you have your chance for your voice to be heard as to what your thoughts are, and bring your knowledge and experience in order to create something that everyone will eventually be using. The legacy data conversion plan and report is in the technical conformance guide, and as you can read the sections that talks about legacy data conversion. And I have to tell you, from a high level, it all sounds, yeah, pretty easy. Oh, I've got legacy data, I'm going to convert it, or okay, I get it, I had legacy, now I need to create standardized data. But it's become a tougher nut to crack than I originally thought, to be quite honest. The technical conformance guide lists 3 examples where they say there's traceability issues that could happen, and we need to know what those are. They are when you take legacy data conversion, you have your data to SDTM only, whether you're doing independent data conversions to SDTM and ADAM, meaning I've got my tabulation data, raw tabulation, I'm going to go to SDTM, I have legacy analysis, I'm going to go into ADAM. Or you're taking your raw tabulation data, it's going into SDTM, and then that SDTM is used to create the ADAM. A lot of times with legacy data, though, analysis has been done already. And you also have to show not only the traceability, but that you got the same results, or if you didn't get the same results, why? didn't you get the same results? And every conversion is different. So to come up with a template to use is something that we've struggled with. Even though the technical conformance guide at a high level says what should be in the plan. Your data, your process intended, the results of the conversions, issues encountered, resolved, and outstanding issues. Okay, at a very high level, that's great. But once again, every conversion can be different. It does mention that it should be provided in the SDRG. That is going to change because this is a standalone document as well. It will go in with a SDRG or a CSDRG or an NSDRG or an ADRG. It could be part of any reviewer's guide, and we've had discussions, and FDA has said, yeah, you're right. It can be a separate document. You can read on what should also be what they're also expecting for legacy data conversions. The project team that I've been working with we've worked on this for quite a while, and we have come to the point where we create a decision tree to determine when a legacy data conversion plan and report should be created. We found, well, what if there's other instances besides what's in the technical conformance guide, and we needed to start back at the beginning of when should I create one, because there's other situations in this technical conformance guide. And we did that, and now we're ready to start back on creating a template, completion guidelines, and example documents. This is our decision tree, and I won't go through each step in it, but it does show what we think are the steps in determining whether you should have a legacy data conversion plan. The area that is where I'm drawing my line with my cursor, that's the technical conformance guide, honestly. The things up above are things that we have talked about when it comes to CDISC, because it really starts with CDISC. If you say something's standardized, and when you say CDISC, that includes not only just SDTM and ATOM, but it goes all the way back to your data collection and CDISC, and whether you collected it in something that was CDISC conformant. And what do we mean by CDISC conformant? This is going to be part of the completion guidelines so that you can go and look at it and determine, do I need this or not? Do I need to put together this plan and report? A lot of times I think it's more of a report, because a plan means I plan on doing it, but I don't really see this being completed until after the conversion has been done. What the team is now concentrating on is the creation of a template, and I meet with my team every other week. We're going to talk about it again in March. What I would like to have happen is that our deliverables are available for public review by the end of this year, and I think we can do it now that we have a framework upon which to create a plan, that we can create a separate plan. We got some of that all taken care of. We will put the deliverables, once again, we'll go out to the wiki with the reviewer's guide, the study data standardization plan, and we will work through versioning of that as well. I'm ready to get this done. I've worked with a great group of people on this one as well. Some of the same people are on both, because we dropped off. We kind of got to a point with the study data standardization plan where we were done, and then we could concentrate on this. But it's the people that get this work done. And we do have some projects within our working group that we do work directly with CDISC on, that we have a good collaboration with CDISC, because on some of these projects we need them to be part of it as well. And if you want to go out to look at the wiki, that's how you can get to it. It's very easy. You can just type in PhUSE Wiki on a browser and it'll come to it. The PhUSE EU site actually has been redone. I think it looks a lot better than it did before. It's easy to navigate. that tells you as a whole when all the conferences are, not just the one in March, but all of the conferences that they have. And also out on the wiki, you can go to the working group and you can see all the working groups and you can see what the projects are. And if you're interested in being part of one, then it tells you who you can contact if you're interested. And with that, I will end the presentation.
Thank you, Jane. We do have time for a couple of questions. If we that includes the people online and here in the audience. Do we have any quick questions? Maura, do we have anybody online?
There's no questions online for Jane yet.
Well, I'd tell you to ask DJ since he's in the room. Is he laughing? Is he laughing when I said that? Did he find that funny?
He's not in the room and he is on mute.
Oh, he's not in the room?
No, he's online.
Oh, he's on the phone. Or he was.
Weird, so.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We do have one question here.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question about the study data standardization plan. Who would you recommend to be the owner of the document?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear all of that. Who would I recommend to what?
Who would you recommend to be the owner
of the owner?
Study data?
Well, like I said, it depends on how your organization is, how you're organized. Basically, it could be stats. It could be a data management person. In the sponsor implementation guide, it lists what we think an owner should be in the qualifications, but it is someone at an asset level who can look across the studies at that asset level, not just I just work on this study only and I don't know anything about the other studies. It's someone that can pull that information together. So it really depends. I've heard other organizations where stats is considered the owner because they're the ones that know the standards. They're the ones that know more about that. In my situation, we are what are called consultants or data scientists, where we look across an asset and then within an asset or a compound perspective. We don't get into each study. We know what standards that study uses, but we're not responsible for the delivery of the data. We're responsible for knowing that we're following standards. So it really depends on how you're organized. And if you have to go to other groups, like for example, I work in early phase. I don't own the non-clinical and I don't own the clinical, and maybe your organization, that could be the same person, that could be 2 people, that could be 3 people. It really just depends. But someone has to spearhead it. Someone needs to say, okay, I've got to create this plan, and now I need input from you and you and you, but you're the one that's coordinating that population of the plan and making sure that it gets created and working with regulatory as well too. So it could be project management. Does that answer your question? Because it really just it depends.
Yeah, that answers it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any
And
other
I
questions?
have to say I'm in the Midwest, and I don't have as much snow as Kevin does, but I hate snow and I don't want it. I'd rather be in California.
Not today.
We do have one online question,
Okay.
if there's time for that.
Yes, we'll take one more question.
Okay. since the SDSP will be used as a communication document between the sponsor and FDA per its completion guideline, all studies within the program must be listed in SDSP, but usually the sponsor will only submit a subset of study data sets to the FDA. How can we indicate which study data will be submitted to the agency via SDSP?
That's a really good question, because we've had that discussion from the very beginning of, is this a submission document? Is it not a submission document? At the time that an SDSP is created, sometimes, and if it's early, you don't know if you're going to go into submission or not. And FDA wants to know, these are the studies that I'm doing, and these are the studies that I've planned. By the time you get to submission, then you know exactly what studies and standards you're going to submit. There could be studies, for example, when I've created one, there are studies that we have planned. There's a lot of studies possibly, but unless they're considered approved or in our clinical trial approved list, they don't go into the SDSP. That's where you have to talk with regulatory and decide, well, what studies go in there to begin with. But it's not a submission document to start with. It's, these are the studies we have, these are the studies we're planning, and these are the standards that we're using. Even if you're, let's say, not going to submit study data, but you're going to submit it as part of an integrated database, FDA still wants to know what standards that study was done in. And we don't really have any type of identifier in the plan to say, this is what I'm going to submit because of that. Because FDA has said they want to see the study. At that study level, what are your standards? Even if it's going to get upversioned in a pool or an integration later. So it's really working with your team to determine what to put, just what to put in there. And then by the time you get to submission, of course you're going to have your studies in there that you want to submit, but there's going to be non-clinical studies in there that have no electronic data that's going to be part of the plan. And it's a living document. We're not going to take out all the non-clinical stuff because it's not being submitted. It's going to stay in there. So I would say that if you had a study, you get to submission and it's not part of it, then that's a discussion with regulatory. Because we have to work with them as to what we share. We don't really want to take a study out of an SDSP though, because it's in a prior version.
Correct. Thank you, Jane, and I appreciate your time and presentation for today. And
thank you. And if you're coming to CSS, let me know.
Yes. Before we have a break, Daphne Ewing from Gilead has a minute.
Well, I just wanted to let you know, great opportunity for us to network, and Gilead is sponsoring a PhUSE single-day event February 23rd at our campus in the 309 building. If you go to the PhUSE website, you can register for that single-day event, and we'd love to have you. And there's a lot of really good presentations. It's basically a metadata discussion with a lot of different real good papers. So hope to see you guys there.
All right, thank you, Daphne. We'll take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back here promptly in 15 minutes. So let's say 2:40. 2:40, be back in here, and we'll continue with 2 more presentations and a panel. Okay, it's time to get started. Please come in and get your seats.
Okay, you figured it out.
Yeah, I saw it bright red, and I went, oh, he's muted. Okay, we're going to get started with our next presentation. Please come in and get your seats. All right, thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Everybody, please get a seat. We need to get started with our next talk. If you're in the back, please go outside if you need to talk. But if you're inside, please quiet down and we'll get started with our next talk. All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Brooks, and I've had the privilege of working with Lisa in a previous job and appreciate her work very much. Lisa has 20 years of experience in drug and vaccine development. For the last 10 years, Lisa has provided NDA and BLA consulting and project management services to the pharmaceutical and biotech industry through her company, Iris Computing. Since her company's inception, she has assisted her clients to the submission of 2 BLAs and 5 NDAs. She is part of 2 PhUSE CSS working groups, the Study Data Standardization Plan and the Legacy Validation Plan Board. Her talk today is what is new in the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide this year. Please welcome Lisa.
Hello, everybody. Now, you just had cookies, but I hope you also had some coffee. It's really warm in here, and I took my jacket off. I couldn't deal with it. I am very excited to be here. I'm very excited to see all my friends out there and to give you guys hugs. I am giving a very simple talk because I'm a simple person. If I have something hard to do, I just ask Elizabeth and everybody at PharmaStaff. So you know, I have a client, and they're doing 3, maybe 4 NDAs in the next 18 months, and one of my colleagues there said something interesting to me. He said, "Oh, we don't know the technical conformance guide for our new drug application because all of our studies started before it came out." And I said, "Oh, really? Do you want your submission to be looked at quickly?" And so I've an uphill battle. So I was on a telecon last week with the Study Data Standardization Plan PhUSE working group with Jane, and Helen was also on the call with us, and she said something very interesting and very simple, and she told me I could share it all with you. And it is, in your data submissions, you should follow the most recent technical conformance guide. So what does that mean? Every 6 months, when they come out with a new technical conformance guide, you need to stay on top of what they're. So I asked my colleague at my client, I said, and I'm not going to say who it is. Man, he might even be on the call, I don't know. I said, "When was the last time you read it?" And he goes, "Oh, I read it when it first came out." So I sent him this presentation. So I created this for my client, and I'm sharing it with you. So basically, all I'm going to tell you is I took the 2 documents, one year ago and one that was just sent out in December, and I did a compare. I'm using PDF, DC, whatever, and I just looked for anything that changed. I didn't rely on what was in the change control in the front of the document, and this is what I learned. There were 4 changes to the guide in 2016. If you ever try to find the old versions of the guide, you're not going to find them online at FDA because they replace it on their website. So I happen to have an old version of it, and so I was able to do the compare. And the new versions are meant to completely replace the old version, and you should adhere to the most recent version. And then there is a new website that you guys should always be referencing, and that is the FDA Study Data Standards Resources website. And this year, a link to that website was added to the Technical Conformance Guide. So now the boring time starts, because I'm just going to go through all of the changes one by one, and y'all need to stay awake. Number one is they want to refer to the Data's Reviewer's Guide with either an N for non-clinical or a C for clinical. And they've actually specified to us what the name of the file should be. So, I'm doing an NDA. There's 37 studies, 17 and submitted, but I'm like looking at all of these and I'm like, you know, what am I going to do? Should we go and change all those file names and all those defined XMLs? I don't know, should I? Well, we're going to have a panel. Maybe we can talk about it. And then it says that we should name the Analysis Data Reviewer's Guide ADRG. And did you notice that they used all for the ADRG? What on earth? Does that mean we really need to use all capitals, or can we, you know, there's ambiguity in these documents coming from them. The data set size, it used to be 1 gig. If it was more than 1 gig, you have to do it. You'd have to split it up and put it in a folder. Now it's 5 gigs. And also they've told all of us, if you have to have a split folder, you don't need to put a define.xml in the split directory. Okay, variable length. You know, this was kind of confusing to me. This, you know, in some of the previous submissions. It's like, should the variable length maximum of what's in your study, the maximum in the data set, and they've actually told us it needs to be the maximum length in the study, unless it's a subqual variable, and that could be the maximum length in the individual data set. They've actually told us now it's no longer a confusion. Also, don't impute dates SDTM level, do that in Atom. However, if you need to use adjudication data, then you can have a domain for that. Just make sure that you clarify in your define or your SDRG, you know, which ones were the original data and which ones were the imputed data. And I just wanted to say, you know, there are some fields in SDTM that require derivation. You know, imputation is not necessarily derivation. So this does not apply to the treatment emergent flag that goes into sub AE. You still need to do that. And I make all of my clients do it, and they hate me for it. They always like, oh, I'll just explain it in the SDRG as a conformance issue. And I always like, no, just add it. It's not that hard. You know the definition of it. It's in your protocol. All right. And this, we've already heard about this from Kevin. Now the ts.xbt is required for all study submissions, and it must include the study start date. And thank you for letting us know, Daphne, that you could just have one record that has the study start date in it. I don't know if I would do that, though. I mean, you could just put the title of your protocol. It doesn't seem like it's too hard to add a little bit to make sure you know what study that TS goes with. Also, just, you know, SNOMED control terminology should be used, and if you use it for your indication in TS, just make sure it's harmonized with your structured product labeling. They pointed that out in this past year. New data set references. They specifically called out exposure as collected in depth details. Carrie and I have some experience with this, where we didn't feel like it would represent an accurate representation of exposure in the way that it was reported in our CRF. So we created 2 versions. One is collected and one in the traditional EX domain. And here's an interesting one. So like Atom dataset label, they tell us specifically not to use the same dataset label as an SDTM. So if you're using adverse events dataset in SDTM, then you don't want to use adverse events dataset in Atom. ADSL should always be included, Kevin said that today as well. It has to contain variables for the baseline characteristics and covariates, and those should be the core variables that are across all of your Adam data sets. So here is a new piece of information, the primary and secondary efficacy endpoints. I should ask John, does the ADRG have, no, you were the SDRG, weren't you? Never mind. In the template for the ADRG, is there a section to indicate what your primary and secondary efficacy endpoints are? Yeah. Okay. So there, I think it's strange that they kind of call that out, because if it's already in the template, but anyways, you have to have that there. So repeated measures. So I've seen this a lot where in your Adam data sets, where you have multiple per subject, and you've listed, the date in which the assessment was done, but you don't list the relative day. There is an error that comes out in the Pinnacle 21 report, and I've seen so often that's just explained away. It's not hard. Just calculate the day variable and omit the error and follow the technical conformance guide. For Adam dates, they're actually saying don't drop the SGTM character version of the variable. Keep it in your Adam data set, but also create a numeric version and apply the appropriate format. Program submission, this is new, and actually we were able to complete this in my last NDA that I did. I helped a client with last December, and that was, and there was some question about it, but it seems very simple. It's all spelled out for us now. When you submit your programs, don't submit the programs with a .sas or if there's some other statistical software you're using, actually convert it. Just change the extension to .txt, because SAS programs are already ASCII-5. So ADSL.sas turns into ADSL.txt. It's pretty simple, and if you know DOS, you can do it pretty quickly. And also, I've seen some confusion about this when I've had different communications from FDA. Some reviewers will actually tell the sponsor that they want to be able to run their code on their system at FDA. And the technical conformance guide says the purpose of us submitting the programs is so that they could confirm the process of the analysis. It's not, we don't have to submit code to FDA that is executable. And I think that a requirement by your reviewer to send executable code is a really high bar, really high bar, especially with a lot of shops and sponsors using CROs. So I was really glad to see that pointed out. They also referenced the CDISC tags, the therapeutic area user guides. They said that they're not going to list the tags in the data standards catalog, but they did list them, the ones that are currently supported, and they're here if you want to take a look at them. And then also they said, if there's a draft tag out there and you want to use it, then you can go ahead and just explain your reasoning for using it in your SDRG, your CSDRG. They have discouraged the use of the controlled terminology of other, and they really want us to find appropriate terminology from the terminology list to use instead. It's possible. It really is. They also added LOINC, the logical observation identifier and codes, to the terminology section. And then they really, really want us to send sample submissions. And I have a feeling we're going to be talking about that a little later. So I want to learn a little bit more about that. Because I have clients that have been submitting their data, their study data, to the IND. And now with this change, do they need to do another sample one? just to make sure they're kind of up to speed and still validated. I think it's going to be interesting to talk to her about that later. Oh, and then the study validation rules. And, you know, so I've had a client tell me, well, it might have a warning or an error in the Pinnacle 21 report, but it's not a requirement in the CDISC IG. And I said, oh, no, there's this whole other thing. There's the FDA business rules that are published on the website. And so now the Technical Conformance Guide this year has pointed out the 2 different validation rules and that we must follow them both. And any errors should be corrected if you can, and if not, you need to explain them. And then finally, traceability. So, you know, and Jane touched on this on the legacy validation report talk. They're actually now, and I've been hearing the FDA reviewers say this at CSS, and that is, you know, you need to show us simply your traceability. How are you moving data from your CRF into ADAM and into your analysis? And now they've said in the Technical Conformance Guide that, you know, please either use CDASH in your data collection or include a flow diagram in your CSDRG. So, and does anybody know if there's any example flow diagrams? PhUSE might have one. I've seen some in some presentations by FDA, but there's some really good ones out there, and I think that we need to, when we're doing the legacy conversion report, we should probably include some samples there so that everybody in the industry knows what FDA is looking for. I just kind of make them up, but so anyways, that's my simple talk. I just wanted to know what's changed in the last year in case you haven't had a chance to see, you know, kind of follow along. But like Kevin said, you really need to stay on top of it because FDA is really expecting you to follow the most recent Technical Conformance Guide. So at the, on this slide is the website for the Study Data Standards resources at FDA, and also a link to the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide. Do we have any questions, or do we want to wait for the panel? Yeah.
You just mentioned that the programs right now changing from SAS to TXT, right? And with the table bigger programs, I know you maybe put on the item folder. Do you need to put that into a defined link then, or you put it in the ADRG reduce guide?
Okay, so the question the gentleman had is, okay, we have all of our SAS programs and they have an extension of .txt. Do you put it into the define?
Just the table bigger programs. I know for the items you need to put in the define values, but for the table bigger programs.
So if you look at the Analysis Data Reviewers Guide template, there's a table at the, I think it's section 5, I can't remember the section, but it's near the back, and it actually shows you where you list all of your programs, what their source data was, what their output was, and that's where you list every program. And I would also, if you're sending any macro code to FDA, you should indicate what macros were used in which programs and have a list of those as well. So that, I believe, belongs in the ADRG.
So my question is about the ADAM dates. You mentioned that we should get the character dates also into the ADAM data sets. What is the logic behind it? I mean, if we are bringing in, like, you know, if you're working with 5 dates, should we get all those dates into ADAM?
It seems so. I don't know the logic. Do we have an FDA person online?
As far as I know, because she pointed out we're supposed to be discouraged imputing dates at ST level. When you bring in the character date and data set, you're doing further processing on it for imputations. So there's a clear traceability right there when the character variable is available and the derived numeric variable is available. If there's been any imputation to that variable for, you know, first day of the month or whatever. So the traceability right there. So main reason is traceability has to be established. That would be logic to include it.
I agree. Thank you very much.
My question is simple. It's about the keeping the attributes. For example, you have to introduce the treatment, the EC. A lot of times that you combine the treatment information, the variables in the past. Anything from STM, you need to change do not make the same variable. Sometimes the EXOs is really derived because of the EC, because of you put them together. Are we really strict on that, or is there any guidance? The exposure data now is really messy to change everything.
So I just want to make sure that I understand your question. So you're talking about exposure data as collected versus the EX domain and the need to often impute or derive to make the exposure domain.
To become the analysis exposure data, and those could be some rules. Say you have full dose, you have partial dose, and they still EX those towards the end coming up. There are so many variables we need to change name, and we need to keep it. What I remember is anything value you change, you do not call the same name.
Oh, so you're asking me, can we use the same name if we've changed the variable?
The value.
The value.
The imputation, yeah.
What do you think, Daphne? You're not supposed to. So it has to get a new name. It sounds like it's a consensus, maybe.
Will you please clarify regarding the data set labels? Adverse events and adverse events. How can we make it different between AE and SDTM?
You know, I think that CDISC actually tells us what data set labels to use in the IG. So if you follow that, you're probably going to be pretty safe. However, have a non-standard domain, just be careful not to use the same data set label. That's what I'm thinking. Like if you have the same data represented in SDTM in a non-standard domain, don't use the same label in your ADSL. You know, change it.
A lot of companies just add analysis at the end of the data set.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a very simple solution. You guys have a lot of questions for such a simple presentation. Yeah.
Well, because your presentation was easy to understand.
It was easy. So
I'm Jeanette Garner. I'm from Gilead, and I have a question about. So I know that we can follow the CDISC STM implementation guide, but now I was wondering if there's any exceptions in terms of what the FDA is expecting from us while using CDISC. So for example, for the SCTM data sets, we are only basically mapping the raw data without any kind of additional iterations. Like for example, that's why I'm trying to elaborate on the item about the imputation of dates. So in SCTM, there's another variable that I guess is allowed. It's like was it DRVFL, which is derived flag for the record. Does that mean like if you derive a record in SCTM, does the FDA not want to see any kind of durations, or is that okay to continue to move forward as long as it checks out?
Yeah, I think that I would have to understand more about the purpose of it, and I think that what FDA doesn't want is I think it was mainly talking about imputing missing dates, because you don't need to do that when you use ISO. And tell me if I'm wrong, but there are some circumstances where you have to do imputations, like exposure and exposure as collected and adjudication data. And using the derivation flag seems like it's a rule that has been, or a standard that has been presented in the IG. Does anybody have any experience with this? Of course John does. I knew he would. Because if I had that question, I would call John. On speed dial.
I've seen some of the was saying that if some record in STTM is derived, then derivation flag is yes. Then they would like to see the logic of derivation in the STRG. So.
And then the define, yeah.
I don't know if that is a requirement for the TA. Present that logic of derivation for that record.
I believe all derivations need to be in the define or in the SDRG. And some of them, and somewhere in the metadata, you have to list how you derived your variables.
Good answer.
Yeah. What do you say, John?
So a good application for the derived flag is when, for instance, in vital signs, you didn't collect body mass index, and you have to derive it because it's going to be something that's used for outcomes and so forth. Then putting that revenue flag to derived.
I'm sure that's like that had to be done at Adam.
You can do that in STTM.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
I have one more slide.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful presentation and all the great questions. So let me get ready for our next presenter. There we go. Our next presenter is John Braga, and he's going to talk about recent changes in FDA requirements from a sponsor's perspective. So let me get rid of this. There we go. And John, I've had the privilege of working with him on a legacy data conversion project about a year ago. So John consulted on submission strategies for approximately 20% of all new molecular entities the FDA has approved over the past 8 years. That's a lot. He is one of the key authors of the PhUSE Study Data Reviewers Guide and Analysis Data Reviewers Guide, both now reference guidance and specifications. He is currently active in the PhUSE working group and producing defined XML 2.0 metadata guidelines. Please welcome John.
Good evening. This is a pretty good crowd for as hard as it's raining out there. You know, really thanks for showing up. Between the people online and the people in the room, we have close to 200 people involved in this. It's pretty cool. So a disclaimer, because you got to have a disclaimer. Of course, I got to turn off my phone. But of course, it's Dave Forbes calling, which means he's probably having trouble getting here and may not make it to the. Yeah. Do you have his phone number?
I don't.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Anyway, I'm not speaking for the FDA, and there are some circumstances here where the FDA isn't even speaking for itself, so we're going to have to guess at some stuff. But the thing you can hear is that whatever you think you know today, and whatever the FDA did yesterday, they're probably not going to do that tomorrow, and you don't know. So, in contrast to Kevin's presentation, where he had a picture of a straight road with trees, this is, I think there's curves. So this presentation overlaps a lot with what Kevin has already said, already talked about, and so some of this I'm just going to sort of skip through real quick, to keep us on task. Most of in this slide, you've already heard something about. I'm going to focus on operational and resourcing implications, what these changes mean for actual operations. So, so this was this has already been covered. There is one thing, though. I actually went back to the 1999 guidance to look at a couple of things. And Lisa was just saying, so they just changed the technical conformance guide to allow 5 GB data sets without splitting. Guess how big a data set you had to split in 1999? Any guesses?
16 meg.
You're closest, 25 megabytes. That 5 GB database, you'd have to split it into like 250 data sets. Wow.
Thank goodness we don't have to provide a point for that.
Okay. So the requirements were enacted. Now it's incumbent on the FDA to enforce them. And Kevin gave us a lot of background on enforcement, so I'm not going to say much here. The one thing, though, that I would add to what Kevin already said is that when the FDA proposed the 4 new rules, validation rules, they said in that document that they can implement these rules on 30 days' notice to the industry, right? So in other words, the rules aren't alive today. If you put in a submission today, it would not be validated according to those rules. They haven't implemented them yet. But if tomorrow they said, okay, rules are implemented in 30 days, middle of March, you do your submission, it's going to get validated according to those rules. That seems like a pretty short time frame, doesn't it? So a little bit, again, about RTF versus rejection. Kevin actually covered this pretty well. I don't have really much to add to it. One of the questions that came up while I was writing this, and somebody asked me, so if one of your studies fails validation, don't you just, doesn't the rest of it just go through and you just have to replace that study? No. It's a unitary, it's a single document. The electron and technical document, the ECPD, is one thing. If any part of it fails validation, then the whole thing just gets handed back to you. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Ruben Jenkins, who's going to be one of the panelists, about exactly how that works. Ruben is at Omniscia. They do regulatory publishing. One thing that I think is very worth pointing out. So rejection sounds like a draconian measure. But in fact, the FDA chose to use rejection as its mechanism rather than RTF for 2 or 3 reasons. One reason is that with a rejection, nobody has to know, right? You can send in your submission a week or 2 early, with maybe not all of the stuff in there, and they can go, yeah, this is okay, or hand it back to you, and the shareholders don't need to know that. Your stock doesn't crash, and you get another crack at it. If you get the submission in, and then a month goes by and you get a refusal to file, almost everybody knows somebody's had the experience that their stock options just lost 85% of their value, right? So the FDA is trying to avoid that. That's why they're using rejection instead of RTF for these things. And it's important to point out that you can do test submissions. And I think Ruben will tell us a little bit more about that during the panel discussion. This is how the FDA explains it. I just lifted this out of one of their documents, one of their presentations. The technical rejection stuff is over here on the right-hand side of the screen. It doesn't really explain much, but it's how they That's how they put it around it. I needed pictures. So the new validation rules, again, Kevin covered this pretty well. These are quotes verbatim, and as you see, and as we commented after, in the questions and answers after Kevin's presentation, there's some profound ambiguities to the way they stated these rules, and clarifications are coming bit by bit. And in fact, during the break, Daphne got an email from the FDA saying, well, wave off what I said before, that's wrong, we've changed our minds. So anyway, this is something that's evolving, clearly. And I put in here a link to the technical rejection criteria document if you want to look it up. Oh, really? Well, I went to the website to get this.
So right, it got changed.
Wow. Okay. So see, it's a fast-moving story. So one of the things I think is worth pointing out is that these rules are different from the other rules for validation in a fundamental way. All of the rules before these two rules that people in biometrics have to worry about, all of the rules before that were rules about the structure and content of the XML backbone of the ECTD. And none of that stuff is biometrics problem. That's a regulatory publishing problem. And if they make a mess of that, usually it's not a problem of weeks or months to fix it. It's a problem of perhaps even hours or a couple of days to fix those things and then throw the submission back in. It's not that big a deal. The thing about these new rules is, if you sort of miss the mark on these and you didn't produce any TS data sets and you've got 30 studies or 20 studies or something going into your submission, now you're going to have to go create TS data sets for all of those. If you messed up in your defined.xmls or something like that, there's real damage to control. Right? There's a lot of sort of makeup to do, and it could take a while. So a technical rejection could set you back quite a bit more than the 8 or 10 days or 20 days that Kevin was talking about. So the bottom line there is that regulatory metrics need to communicate a lot more closely and carefully with each other than they have in the past, because regulatory can't even detect all of the issues that may cause a rejection, and biometrics, until they get some training, may not be aware of the issues that they have to be watching for as they're producing these deliverables. The TS rule, Kevin explained this pretty well. I'm not gonna rehash that stuff. Except to point out again, because it becomes important later in the presentation, that the FDA's validation software requires TS even for legacy data sets, because it has to look in there to find the start date of the study, so it can decide whether that study has a data standardization requirement now or not, right? No TS data set, no start date record. Start date implies that data standards are required but are not present in the submission. The submission gets handed back to you. So a note about the TS domain. Once upon a time, it was optional. Sponsors treated it as very optional and wondered why they even had to do it. Now it's become mission critical to the FDA because it drives their search engines. And also soon will be part of the metadata that drives their validation. And so because of that, TS should conform to the latest standard, regardless of the SDTM or terminology versions that were used in the subject data. So if you were using, SDTM version 3.1.2 or 3.1.2 Amendment 1 for your subject data, you don't create a TS data set that conforms to the same terminology or structure as the 3.1.2 subject data. You use the latest terminology and structure. One really good reason is that STDTC was not even in the terminology, I don't know what, a couple of years ago or something like that. That's a relatively new thing. Old TS datasets don't have it. So something to watch out for. Fixing this is not a big problem, although one of my colleagues pointed out that, TS isn't as easy as it looks. It's not just a matter of filling in a spreadsheet. The content matters, and some of that content is hard to come by. So the add a media cell rule, I think there's still some ambiguities. And so, don't take this to the bank. But Kevin already talked about this, and I'm going to say that he's got a pretty good take on it. Diversions of standards matter. So the answer is yes, and I think it was Jane maybe that pointed out that, or somebody, yeah, Jane pointed out that in the technical in the standards catalog, it tells you what versions are accepted by the FDA. So right now, today, if you sent them a submission with SDTM in version 3.1.1, that would fail validation. Sorry, not today. When they implement the validation rules, if you send a 3.1.1 SDTM, that will fail the validation rules. Right now, there's only one version of add and one version of send that are allowed. XML 1.0, I think Kevin's presentation said it was going to expire in like 3 weeks. I think it's March of next year, but somebody should check on that. He said 2017. I thought I read 2018. I was looking at the catalog, and there's a link to the catalog at the bottom of this screen here. So, how do they know what? Because SDTM looks like SDTM. From 3.1.2 to the present, it's kind of hard to tell the difference if you're not using all of the variables. So, how do they know? The answer is they look in the defined.xml. The validation process is going to look at your defined.xml. The defined.xml tells it what the name is and what the standard version is. Now, those things are things that a lot of times biometrics groups right now, when they fill those in, they do it in their sleep. Or they just leave it the way it was for the last study, or in the study before that, and the study before that, and 20 studies before that. This is something that we're all going to have to pay attention to now. Because if we tell it what the standard is in the defined.xml, and we tell it a standard that the FDA doesn't want to get, then that's going to be a problem. Reject the submission. Define isn't just a decoration. And so a note about vendor data. You're all evaluating your vendor data. I know that. Some vendors take a little while to catch up, and you've probably witnessed that too. And so for the time being, it would be safest to assume that they're not up on all of this stuff. And so you want to put those QC checks on your list and not assume that they're on their list. Is strict compliance enough? Now, there was actually some discussion about this, and I think this is an important codicil to this whole discussion of requirements, and that is there are all kinds of situations, as Lisa pointed out, where data standards are not required, and you can sit across from the FDA and go, you know what? That's not required, we're not going to do it. And they will sit across the table from you and go, well, I guess we can't make you do it. That's the start of a bad thing, because they need SDTM to do their review. And by the way, they also need ADSL to go with the SDTM to do their review. And the reason is that they have these cool desktop tools for doing analyses. They've got way cooler stuff than the industry has. And if they can't use their desktop tools, the options are very grisly for them. They aren't going to make your PDUFA date. And so what they'll do, what we've seen them do, is they asked for SDTM, you said no, they said okay, and they accept the submission, but then 2 weeks later, they hand you a request that says, can you send us data sets that look like this? And it's a cut and paste out of the SDTM IG. Or, maybe even worse, they go, well, we're finding it hard to work with these data sets. Can you give us these additional analyses? And the additional analyses will be a whole list of tables, mock-ups of stuff that they would have gotten out of their own desktop tools if only you had submitted SDTM, right? They want to see that stuff one way or another. And if they don't see it, they get very anxious. And it moves their PDUFA date back. So the short answer to all of that is you really have to give them SDTM when they need it. Now, they're pretty judicious about saying that they really need it, but pretty much bet that all phase 2-3 studies, they're going to want it. Maybe some questions about that later. Non-clinical data. Let me first ask, is there anybody in the room here who has dealt with non-clinical data? Yeah. One hand. 2 hands, I know you have. Okay.
I have people asking me about it, and I say, I don't know.
So dealing with clinical data may be in a lot of our futures pretty soon for a couple of reasons. So unlike SDTM, send data for animal studies, that's a big departure from the way animal studies have been done in the past. And I'm not going to go into lots of details about that because mostly people here aren't dealing with animal studies, but it's pretty typical when an animal study is done that there's a protocol for it and all of that, but when they collect data, they collect it in lab notebooks, and they transcribe those lab notebooks into spreadsheets, and they just turn the spreadsheets into XPTs that get submitted. Right? It's a very minimalist process. They don't have all of the infrastructure for doing conversions to something that looks like SDTM. They just don't have that, and they don't have the expertise. So it's going to be a heavy lift. The dates for when things have to happen, that's a little bit of a wiggly a topic, but I think probably for pretty much everybody in this room, the short answer is your INDs have already been filed. You're working on clinical studies mostly now. INDs have already been filed. That means this requirement is effective today and will go into effect and will involve and will enter into the validation of your submission 30 days after the FDA tells us that they're implementing. Last thing about send implementation issues. Those studies are cheap in comparison to clinical studies, and they go really fast, and they do a lot of them. And now you're going to have to get all of that data into send, and in the short run, doing the send conversions is going to cost more, maybe 2 or 3 times as much as the original study itself, because the infrastructure isn't there and they didn't set themselves up to do it and so forth and so on. So somebody a company would have been preparing for this already for a while in order for it not to be a problem. And what that means is that there's going to be a tsunami of requests to CROs for doing send conversions. And my guess remains to be seen whether this comes to pass or not. But if your company is doing animal studies and they look around and go, oh my God, we're going to have to spend $100,000 to get some CRO to convert this data, but those guys know how to convert SDTM data, and this is just like SDTM data, so why don't we just have our biometrics group do it? My guess is that some of these conversions may be flopping into our laps, from people we've never met before. And so, one last thing to say about the CROs is that just like in the early days of SDTM, we've seen some CROs adopting some kind of dubious practices that eventually the FDA is going to go, no, that's no good, we don't want that, and then your data is going to be like that, and you're going to have to do something about it. An example from the SDTM world, two examples from the SDTM world. For a while, there were some CROs that created SDTM data sets with every single allowable variable in every single domain. Can you feature how much noise that is in an SDTM data? So for instance, the IE domain, I love this one, has normal range flags and stuff like that. It's like, really? IE? And we've already seen some stuff like that going on with send data coming from vendors. So keep an eye peeled for that. That's not going to fly. The other thing that anyway, that's why we now have validation rules in Pinnacle 21 that warn you that there are permissible variables with nothing in them, right? Because in those warnings would generate, that would generate hundreds, maybe thousands of warnings about empty variables. They have no source. The other thing that we have, very strong validations for in Pinnacle 21 now is variables that are too long. That was another thing that CROs were doing for a while, was that everything that wasn't a numeric variable was a 200-character variable, because that makes everything stackable. It's super easy, right? Except that your 25 megabyte lab data set all of a sudden becomes a 5 gigabyte lab data set because everything is 200 characters. We're seeing some stuff like that coming out of the CROs with send data. So, yep, there's more curves ahead. This is not the regulatory apocalypse. This is not actually going to be that hard a thing to deal with for most companies. For any company that's following the current technical conformance specifications, these things are the technical conformance guide. This is not new news for most of it. But there are things about the validation process that have been poorly QC'd by biometrics groups and by regulatory groups in the past. Nobody needed to care about them, like the standard name and standard version attributes in the define.xml, for example. And all of a sudden, these things are going to matter a lot. And so everyone is going to have to up their QC on certain things to avoid rejections. And because of that, even though it's no big deal for most companies who are doing things sort of in an up-to-date way, it feels like there are tripwires sort of hidden everywhere in all of this stuff. And some sponsors are going to have to rethink how they handle their non-clinical data. And we can't drive with a rearview mirror anymore. And that is the end of that. Thank you.
Any questions?
They're not online.
Okay. We've got one in the room here.
Yeah, my question is, anybody who works with the FDA, do they know if there is a plan for the FDA to have these tools available on the cloud or the internet or wherever, so that we can do these checks before we submit that data?
That's a really good question, and I haven't heard any discussion of that yet. The way the FDA has made tools available, validation tools available to us up to now, is by including them in the Pinnacle 21 diagnostics. And so I'd sort of guess that there's going to be a new version of Pinnacle 21 come out after some of this stuff settles down a little bit. That'll give us clues about this.
Question regarding how many studies need to be in the package. I mean, is there any requirement saying any study, including the animal study, must be in the package? Or, I mean, if you ask them in the pre-NDA meeting, they may say, yeah, everything, the more the better. Then what's our standpoint regarding what's the minimum study need to be in the package?
Okay, that's another good question. I actually had a couple of slides that I just cut out because it was too much. And one of them was about the FDA's willingness to exclude clinical studies from a submission package. 2-3 years ago, 3-4 ago, you could have gone to the FDA with a plan that said, there are these studies, they're old, it's bad data, they've been superseded by better, more robust studies since then. We'll just not submit that data. For the last 2 years, that has not flown even once. The FDA basically comes back and says, paraphrasing it, you have a regulatory obligation to submit your data for the studies that you run. Submit the data. So for clinical studies, you're going to have to put them all in pretty much. I would count on that. If you try and get out of it, you're going to have to confess to things you really don't want to confess to.
Add-on question. What about the compound that we bought from other companies that's really that it's hard to get data? It's PK was done. Can we just
Yeah, so that's so the question is, what if your company bought a compound from another company and it's hard to get stuff from the other company, and that's not uncommon. That's not an uncommon scenario. This is one of the cases where, so again, let me underscore that I am not a regulatory expert. Regulatory is not what I do. I talk a lot about regulatory issues. I see a lot of things, but I'm not the one to ask that question. What I've seen is that you have to try really hard to get that stuff from your partner or whoever you bought. If you can't get it, if it can't be had, then that's a case where somebody in the company has to confess to some awful, crime, and then they'll say, oh well, okay, whatever, Or you may have to redo the study.
I have 2 questions. First is around this SSTDDC. So there is some confusion around whether it is the first informed consent date or first enrolled or randomized subject, or does it include screen
The SSTDDC, the formal definition of that is it's the earliest informed consent date in the study. The earliest informed consent date. So if you have screen failures in the study and they're in DM, then their informed consent dates count.
My second question is around, you mentioned in the standards catalog that FDA may not support certain versions on certain days. But the time span of a project or a program that goes to 20 can be quite long. And you may have some studies which were done in a version at version 3.1. So what's your recommendation? Do we remap it to the newer version or just submit it?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're actually dealing with a submission right now where that was the case, where some very early studies, done back in 2007, 2008, I think, were done in version 3.11, and those studies were up-versioned. But because the original analysis was based on the 3.11 SDTM, the 3.11 was also included in the submission as legacy data, right? So there was a legacy bunch of SDTM and another bunch of SDTM up-versioned in the SDTM folder in the ECDD. That's a tricky bit of business. 3.11 is a very old version of SDTM, and the FDA has been pretty charitable in not sunsetting newer versions than that. Even though they would really, really, really like to sunset 3.12 and just have Amendment 1 through the current through 3.2 as the allowable versions. They'd like that, but they're not doing that because of this very reason, I think. The tricky bit comes if you have to up-version terminology, then traceability back to your original analysis becomes a lot trickier. Anyway, that's just a long conversation that you have to have internally in your company.
Is that where a waiver would be something that you have?
That's a really good question, and I haven't looked into how the waiver, what kind of reasons that you could give for waivers and so forth. It's a good question.
In some kind of filing, the example would be like sometimes the sponsor bring in the study from outside, like the investigator sponsor study or some organization.
Right.
They might not necessarily use CDISC format. How do you suggest sponsors handle these type of stuff?
Well, whenever there's an investigator IND study that's included in a submission, that's going to cause you some problems. And one of the biggest problems is that they typically have pretty poor data quality. And so that's another thing where you're just going to have a sort of a tough internal conversation about what you can do with that data. But my guess is going to end up putting it into SDTM. If only because when you put it into SDTM, it gives you a much higher confidence in the quality of the data. You've looked at it deeply enough to know that it's not, gone down some rabbit hole.
John, there's a question online now.
Okay.
Is Atom version 1.1 also okay to use for submissions, though the catalog only lists version 1.0?
The catalog only lists version 1.0. That's the end of that discussion. But the catalog says 1.0. That's true. Let's see.
If we do it again.
Yep, yeah. So it's fair to say that this whole discussion is going to evolve as the FDA tries to implement these rules, right? They're going to go, oh, wow, we didn't think about that. And the rules are going to change a little bit, and they're going to give people some leeway on some of the rules and so forth and so on. Because the last thing they want to do is put a bubble in their own workflow where all of a sudden they're not getting any submissions through that they can work on because they're all getting rejected, right? They're not going to do that, and they don't want to, just off the industry. So there's going to be some negotiation involved in this, and I think we're going to hear some of that negotiation at the CSS PhUSE conference. Another reason to go.
Oh, John, this is Kevin. If I kind of give my input about that ADAM 1.1.
Sure.
Yeah, and then right now that the reason that only ADAM version 1.0 is available in Data Standard Catalog is that actually ADAM team hasn't developed the validation criteria or validation check for version 1.1 yet. And right now that's why it's not there. And once ADAM team developed that part and it got passed by FDA, and it will be available for Data Standard Catalog. That's kind of my understanding at this moment.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So, Kevin, was there anything else that I said in this presentation that you objected to?
No, just kind of additional information.
Okay. You objected to some stuff, yeah.
Just a quick comment on one of the things you mentioned on your slide, that how does FDA checks that what standard your data subscribe to. One place you mentioned is defining XML.
Yeah.
Or I would expect that the structure of the data, for example, comparing 3.1 to the later version, like slotting on scheduled visits, wouldn't that be one of those checks they will be looking for? Because I had one of the CROs submit data to me mentioning this is 3.12, and lo and behold, when I check the structure of the data, it doesn't. I mean, it's a one thing to mention on define it's 3.12, but it's not really structurally following it. So wouldn't that be some of the additional things the FDA tools will be looking into?
Right, and that's a really good question. And go back to the FDA's picture here. So what they're going to do with define.xml is a little bit speculative right now because they haven't actually written the software, I don't think, yet. They're still arguing about what the rules are going to be for the software. But one of the things you notice in the FDA's picture here is that once it passes basic validation, then it goes through quality checks, right? So the stuff that you're talking about is definitely on the table for the quality checks. How well it does in the quality checks is going to determine how quickly they can review it, right? So it still matters, but it may not, involve a submission rejection, just a,
So it may become not the technical rejection part of it, but the 60-day part of the review process.
Right, yeah, and the FDA uses the refuse to file very judiciously. For the only ones that I can remember in recent years where the FDA issued a refusal to file because of data issues was because a company forgot to include the PK data in a PK study. Right?
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So this is Daphne again. In the e-study guidance.
So wait, hang on. Daphne's going to correct me because she just got an email from the FDA.
No, this is from the e-study guidance that was published in 2014.
Okay.
And a footnote on physical page 9 of that document, it says, for the purpose of this guidance, study start date for clinical studies is the earliest date of informed consent among any subject that enrolled in the study.
Enrolled. Okay, so it doesn't count the screen failures. Okay, fair enough.
Screen failures in the app. You count that?
Not in the study start date. So in your TS domain, this is where we get that. That's where I interpret it from.
We're out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, we need.
I'm just asking this question. So is it okay to have dates in your data which is prior to study start date?
Sure, there's lots of dates in your data. Anything in MH.
Yeah.
a good question. It probably falls out, but if you explain this one.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna still have to deal with the Pinnacle 21 diagnostics, and they're pretty persnickety about some stuff like that. Okay, done.
Thank you, John. So we're going to move in now to a panel discussion, and we have with us Reuben Jenkins here, who's president of a company called Isha, which does regulatory publishing. We have online Dave Borbas, who was supposed to be here but was not able to make it today. And also on our panel, we have Lisa and John, who has spoken. But we wanted to give a minute to Reuben. You can come up here to just explain, because he has experience with this ESG that we hear about. And we'd just like for him to briefly explain what the ESG is about. So welcome, Reuben.
Hi, everybody. Okay. All of this is happening so that you understand, because the agency realizes that you guys have created a treasure trove of information that makes it easier for them to review. That's what really this is all about. As far as just the overall process and what the ESG is, the ESG is a way to transmit your submission from wherever you are in the world to the agency. It takes away the nonsense of, and you all remember this, of boxing things up and sending stuff to the document control room and having somebody on the other end run up and get the stamp on the letter so that you can say that it's all done. And you could go back to your CEO and upper management and make them really happy. I actually think that the ESG is one of the best initiatives that they've ever created, because it's real time what happens. You basically upload your submission, you press a button, you walk away, data is transmitted. Depending upon whether you go to CEDAR or CBER, it will automatically load the submission once it's already at the agency into their validation tool. It will validate the submission, and you will know within, depending upon the time you push, because everybody just assumes that the agency is only getting their submission, but they get thousands of submissions a day. You will know within 2 hours to 8 hours of whether or not your submission passed technical validation. Okay? And what's important here is to understand, and I think Kevin did a great job of it, but he was very high level. There are really 3 groups that are dealing with your submission. You have the ESUB group, whose sole job is to make sure that I did my job correctly and built something a technically sound XML backbone. I tell my clients, you could give me 1,000 to 100,000 pages of blank stuff, but if I hyperlink it, bookmark it, and give it an XML index, I can get it to pass. So then you also have the eData group, who's basically looking at your data, and that's really where you need to be concerned about now, because, like I said, it's a treasure trove of information. It's all there. It's all in the data. And now everybody's figured out that's where it all is, and they're basically giving you kind of the same standard now. You said that there were supposed to be 12 things in here. We're checking to see if those 12 things are there. Then, once you pass that hurdle, then what we're going to do is basically go and look at your content to make sure the content of what you gave us is correct. Then you have the reviewer itself at the division. They don't get anything until it passes what they call global submit validation. That's what the agency uses. So it will automatically load. I typically get an acknowledgement receipt because I typically push my clients' submissions. And it'll say quite clearly, you have passed technical validation. Then it gets to the reviewer. And it also goes, if you submitted data, to eData. And the thing that people don't understand is that these 3 groups don't necessarily talk to each other. Everybody just assumes that it's all one happy group that's doing this. So you could, in effect, get a reviewer, division, to ask you to do something that eData knows they shouldn't be doing. And the nature of it is that a regulatory person, because they don't understand what you do, and believe me, they don't. Trust me, they just don't. I don't. I know that lights come on, but how you guys get there, I honestly don't know. But the idea is that regulatory's immediate response is to run and say, I'm going to give the reviewer what they want, as opposed to, no, you need to get CDER eData or eData involved to make sure that what they're asking you to do isn't going to violate what the guidance are. So that's kind of the spiel that I wanted people to understand, because there really isn't an understanding that there are multiple people with hands in the pie that aren't necessarily talking. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you, Ruben. All right. Don't go far. So if we can have our panelist up here. Is Dave online?
More question for you.
No, he hasn't joined yet.
Oh, he hasn't joined yet. Okay, thank you, Maura. So, so we want to give priority set questions if we need them. But are there any questions from the audience first, since we have some people here, John and Ruben and Lisa, that have experience? Are there any specific questions for any of them before I get into maybe some questions I have?
I'm not sure why I'm up here because I just called John.
Okay. Okay, we have a question back here. Let's see, do we have a second mic? Yeah, we called it.
She has a job now.
Mr. James, from Architects. That question you can say, technical rejection and the file. My understanding from what the petition says, training our FDA with more rules for the front of technical rejection. That means, for the refusal to file, the hard technical part is less likely to get the refusal to file from the road. That's my question to you.
Okay. Here's the difference between a technical rejection and a refusal to file. Okay. Let's say, and I'm going to use something like the ISS as an example. Okay. Let's say that in your discussions with the agency, you decided that you weren't going to include ISS, and you were going to summarize your safety and efficacy in 273 and 274. Okay. When I said, well, the first thing I'm going to say is, hey, did you contact the agency about this? Do they know that you're doing this? Half the time I get, oh. Or the other half is, yes. When that submission goes through and gets validated, the expectation is that there should be something in the leaf element 5353, whether it's a full ISS or a simple document that says, hey, oh, by the way, we agreed to do this in 273. That's how you can get a technical rejection. The FDA is not sitting around like Snyder and Whiplash deciding that they want to reject your submissions. They don't. There's no benefit for them to do it because there's somebody waiting for your drug. But the idea is that you need to make sure, and this is where it comes to be a really good regulation, to understand what that table of contents is that defines what goes into your submission. And the idea is that they need to go to each discipline and say, okay, we have this drug, okay? We feel that it should do this. You tell me, based on your discipline, give me the argument, the sound argument, that's going to allow them to let this drug go to market. And once you define that, then you have to define all the pieces that are necessary to make that happen. So in your case, when it comes to data, if you don't have a TS data set, is that what it's called? It's going to get rejected. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I tell people that if you think of a submission as a thesis, there are some things that are finite. You have to have a 1571 have a 356H. But you may be able to argue a waiver based on not having a particular information, but you need to have a sound argument. So there are marching orders. And really, if you get a refusal to file, everybody just needs to get fired, because it just means that you have an awful wet mess that you put together and sent in. It really comes down to that.
I want to add, you mentioned something, did you have this conversation with the agency? And one of the reasons why I've been pushing the study data standardization plan so strongly with all of my clients is because it's an opening to have this conversation with the agency. And we haven't been doing it at IND. I mean, because nobody knows what it is. I'm like the first person to tell them about it. And it usually goes into their Type C briefing document for their pre-NDA. I mean, they're not ready for it, and then they're all scrambling. And I mean, even by this time, they still haven't decided what studies are going to be ISS and what they're pooling. But it almost forces the sponsor to prepare for the conversation, and that's going to protect you from things like refusals to file.
Yeah. Another thing to add to that is that whenever you have a discussion about, like I said, it's a thesis. Think of it as you're trying to get your PhD. You're coming up with the argument. So at some point, you're going to go to the agency and you're going to say, I would like to do this. Okay? If it's really important to your getting approval down the road, what you should really do is take that discussion, make sure that there's an official email, and then you put that email into section 112 of your submission, because 112 is kind of the housing of all of your emails. Because what you don't want to happen is, and this has happened to some clients that I have, you start off with A, and then a couple of years later you get down to B, and you get a whole group of new reviewers that come back and say, well, you've got to start this all over again. And you go, well, no. If you look, we told you this is what we agreed to. So then it kind of puts them on notice that you just can't change the rules midway.
One of the similes I use sometimes in presentations is that RTM is a slow-moving bullet. It's easy to dodge with basic due diligence. You got to do the due diligence, and you have to communicate to the FDA. That's the other thing that 2/3 of the slides in all presentations say is it's okay if the FDA said it was okay.
Right.
Any other questions out there?
And we also have Kevin online. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Actually, I didn't really hear the questions, but I think I could pass this one.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the online audience, Maura?
I'll repeat the question next time.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
James.
So as you just mentioned, can I say if I try to avoid the technical rejection, I can do a sample submission, try to make FDA take a look at my package, right, before submission. If I want to do, to avoid refuse to file, I can do a mock submission. So they can review the contents before I do full submission. What's your suggestion on that?
Getting them to review content is a way higher bar, because that actually takes real time of theirs away from reviewing submissions that they already have. And they don't have staff set aside to just review mock submissions.
We are actually trying to evaluate to say which way to do a mock submission or sample submission for our company. So I know, for the sample submission much easier, just evaluate the data package, but for mock submission, maybe relate to the contents of those things. Maybe
mock submission isn't really a thing for the FDA. If you want something like that, then there are actually consulting companies out there where you can hand over a submission to them, and they have former FDA reviewers and stuff like that on staff. And they'll look at your submission and tell you whether they think it's going to pass muster at the agency.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks.
And think you really can't replace the conversation you have with FDA in advance, because that is what's going to assure you that you have everything you need to get to an approvable product. I mean, we're not in the business of throwing something against the wall and hoping it sticks. I mean, there's a lot of really smart people putting a lot of thought into this, and the FDA, from my experience, is very accessible to talk to, and Daphne talks to them all the time, apparently.
E-data, yeah. Well, they are. They really are. Well, I think there was this, years ago, it was always a very combative relationship. You always had to fight against them. The bottom line is, they have something you want, which is approval. So you really don't want to piss them off. So you really want to go and try to build a partnership with them. I tell people, don't go in hat in hand, because you want to be in a position of making the first offer. This is what I think we should do from a sound clinical standpoint, and let them come back and chip away at it. Because if you walk in there and say, I don't know what to do, they're going to ask for the world, and you're going to end up spending a lot of money for potentially no value.
So I just had a situation where we proposed to FDA a very minimal requirement for an NDA, and they agreed. They agreed, oh, don't submit any of that phase 1 data, but prepare it just in case. And then, a month later they asked for it. Thank God we were ready. You know, so you know, you might propose a minimal TAP, and FDA might say, oh yeah, that's okay, but then when they start digging into the data and looking at it, even before they accept the package, they're going to come back and say, oh, send me this study, and you just need to be ready for it. Because, you know, it's your product. You're the ones that are going to be making a ton of money from it. You need to really put your best foot forward, and you need to get it approved as soon as you can. I mean, because it's money every day.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that I left out in my presentation that was going to take too much time to explain was that I forget.
Okay. Well, I have a question for the panel. So now that the Pinnacle 21, I guess, is behind the ball because they have new validation rules and they haven't put it in to their product yet. If you're doing a submission, how do you do the validation rules without Pinnacle 21 having them all programmed now?
John?
Things like 1734 and those things?
Yeah.
Well, what you really should be able to do is, well, we're also a software developer, so when the technical specifications come out, we actually build demos based on what the technical specification is. We actually submit demos to the agency. You have to realize that they don't have a software development group, so they really don't know the reality of what it is they're putting out there. So a lot of the discussion is kind of back and forth, going like, well, is this what you think you want? Is this what you want to kind of, yeah, that's what it's really going to kind of look like.
Yeah.
So there are viewers out there and validators that should be able to produce to let you know whether or not you're getting these validation errors. The problem is that the agency hasn't really sorted out just what they really are. So they're kind of all over the fence. I'm sure Daphne, you'll get one thing that says this today, and then you'll get something tomorrow that says something completely different. So what's ultimately going to happen is that you're going to start way out here, and then there'll probably be a period where they kind of go, well, we'll let it go, and then you get to a point where they've honed in, and then there's sort of an agreement on where we're going to go with this.
Actually, you know, I've been standing here thinking about your question, Carrie, because when you look at Pinnacle 21, it references the FDA business rules.
Right.
In the far right-hand sheet. So maybe I was under the wrong assumption that Pinnacle 21 was referencing those rules, because I see some warnings and errors that aren't a part of CDISC but are instead a part of the business rule. So I think it's a good question for Max. We need to understand as an industry how behind they are, or if they are behind. Do you know, John? Anybody know? Anybody have Max on their cell phone?
Yeah.
Give him a text.
I do have Max on my cell phone, but I'm not going to call him right now.
Come on, turn on speakerphone.
I mean, we don't have a choice because we're the last piece that has to send it. So.
It will be seeing in a few weeks.
That's right. I'll ask him then.
Yeah.
Hopefully no one has a submission.
One of the things that Dave said, that there was a question on the, a question from one of the attendees of the Ether about when and where the slides are going to be made available. So there's Carrie or somebody is going to send an email with a link to the Bay Area CDISC network has a website. It's within the CDISC website, and we post all of these things there. So we'll send out an email with a link to that website, and then there will be then you can just sort of download the presentations.
Yeah, I'll be able to do that. And another question I had is going, maybe I know Jane's not on, but is the traceability issue, and I think Lisa touched upon it in her presentation, about a flow diagram of if you're using CDASH to show how your data flowed in the study. And the question I had was last year there was a PhUSE seminar that said if you use CDASH, it makes your SDRG easier to do it. Whereas if you use something other than CDASH as a database standard, you have to do more work in that. And last year at the PharmaSud, I brought this question up, and it seemed that the audience really doesn't like CDASH much as a standard, but that very few people are actually using it. So, but yet, if you use CDASH, it seems like they're trying to tell you that if you use CDASH, it's going to make your life easier in terms of the SDRG. And want to respond?
I do want to respond to that, and I'm going to let John talk too. David Izard has a really nice slide that I actually thought about asking him if I could steal, but I ran out of time. And it has 3 or 4 different flavors of a data traceability diagram that and it is absolutely beautiful. So it would be really nice if we could share that, and then people could just replicate it for their own studies and their own circumstances. But yeah, so I'm on are you on the legacy data report thing with me? So there's always this debate. What is legacy? And the idea is anything that is not CDASH is legacy. But the problem is there's so much external data, and everybody has it, PK data, lab data, ECG data. All of that is not coming in CDASH. So does that mean your study's legacy and you need to use a data flow diagram? John, your turn.
I think that's actually what Jane is working out as we speak for the next PhUSE conference. The thing I was going to mention about CDASH is that I suspected for a while, and actually talked to some FDA people at the PhUSE, CSS PhUSE conference. My suspicion was that the FDA folks really thought that if you were using CDASH, then an SDTM conversion was a button-pushing exercise. And they are tragically mistaken about it. It seems to be an almost universal belief. Also, perhaps a belief among certain CEOs and vice presidents of your companies. That's a button-pushing exercise, and because of that, this whole dialogue around this legacy data conversion plan is just opaque to them. They don't understand, what the issues are.
It's a conversion every single time. I've never seen it where it's not a conversion.
There's never not going to be a conversion because you have to interpret your source data into the standard. Oh well. And I think actually this is really off topic, but one of my concerns is that if you were to ask FDA reviewers, how do you know when a sponsor is lying, right? their answer, once upon a time at least, would have been, well, they're good, and they give you analysis data. And because their actual experience was that you couldn't trust the analysis data that you got from sponsors. It would only take them 3 minutes to find the first mistake in it, right? And what they haven't understood yet is that for most companies, the process of creating STTM is exactly the same. It's the same as the process they use to create analysis data. I don't think they understand that yet. When they do understand it, we might see some more changes.
Does Kevin have anything to say about that?
Yeah, Kevin, do you have any input?
Actually, I'm not quite sure whether if we implement CDISC and it's going to really help STTM implementation. A lot of time that CDISC is the way you collect the data, and then the way that it impact the programmer is about that actually the raw data from EDC systems. So if it come out more nicely, then it's much easier to convert to STTM. So implementing CDISC I'm not really sure whether it really helped in the CDISC implementations. And another thing that I'd like to mention about the traceability is that actually last year in the PhUSE CSS, and actually Helena mentioned about that ADRG and flowchart. And she really emphasized about certain example that some sponsors send that flowchart about Atom dataset, because that they create a very complex Atom dataset. They also use intermediate Atom dataset, so they actually sponsors actually show those diagram of how that their complex Atom dataset created using the interim Atom dataset. So actually the FDA really appreciate and how that some sponsor go beyond to show the traceability in ADRG.
All right. Thank you. So another question, maybe looking forward. I mean, right now it seems like there's a lot of ambiguity, and we're trying to guess what need to be done and figure out. How long do you think this is going to take to settle, and where this is going?
It's been settling for a decade.
Yeah.
Ever since we've had this CDISC.
From my perspective, it just keeps going. There's always a change. There's always a new way to look at something. There's always a new spec you can come up with. I think what happens is it comes out and then it takes some time for everybody to sort of sort it out. No one ever wants to be the first one to be the trial person to go through it. But at the end of the day, it kind of sorts itself out. I'm looking at least 2 years for this to really sort out. Because if you think about how they did it, what is it? May 5th, 17 is for electronic ANDAs, BLAs, and NDAs, right? And then a year later, it's INDs. So if you kind of look at the nature of an IND versus an NDA, an IND has a lot of non-clinical data in it. So you can see why that date is not May 17, because they have to figure out what they're going to do with all this non-clinical stuff. So I'm thinking at least 2 years. But the big thing you have to do is you're going to have to educate, not so much tell us exactly how you do it, but you need to get your regulatory people involved in this, because they truly don't understand. I don't understand it. Like you, I call John. When something doesn't look right, I call him and I go, John, does this make sense? He'll go, no, it doesn't. And then I have to go back because the regulatory person doesn't get it. So they don't need to necessarily know the nitty-gritty details of what you do, but they should know that 3.11, look and see whether or not that's current or not. And I think that's really going to be the pivotal thing to whether or not this is going to be successful or not.
I think that what's happening now is just creating an environment where your biometrics group really needs to partner more closely with your regulatory group. There's always this kind of division, but in the last 5 years, I've really been partnering closely with regulatory groups, and almost, sometimes my client is project management, sometimes it's biometrics, but lately my client has really been regulatory.
Yeah.
And I'm a SAS programmer.
Yeah, I actually, no, go ahead.
Yep, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, actually, I definitely agree about the correlation with the regulatory department, because we realize that in many cases when sponsors need to do late stage conversion, either legacy data to STTM or preparing all those documents into ECTD requirement or CDISC requirement, it takes a lot more time to prepare and it becomes very expensive. So, preparing the documentation and data set and in cooperation with the regulatory department will actually eventually save the money for the company and resource.
Yeah. Do we have any any other questions from online?
Yeah, we do. We have a pretty long one, so I'm going to read it out. Based on the PhUSE SDSP working group, the data reviewer wouldn't be looking at an SDSP. Only the eData team at FDA would look at it. But the matter of fact, even a data package passes technical validation in FDA, the data reviewers can still have issues with data sets that sponsors submitted. Therefore, the SDSP really cannot 100% serve as a communication document between the sponsor and the FDA for data submission. Should the data reviewers, or should we continue, should PhUSE extend the SDSP audience to the data reviewers, or should we continue to use the Type C meeting to discuss the data structure and format with the FDA, which in some cases it would be too late for the sponsor to make any changes if any significant requests were raised by the FDA during the Type C meeting? Any advice or suggestions from the panel?
Wow, that is a long question. Can you maybe summarize the bullet points?
I'm going to try, because I was listening and I'm very familiar with that question. So it sounds like this person is saying that the SDS data standardization plan is delivered to the eData group, and it's done a lot of times at the pre-NDA meeting, but it's also used as a discussion. I mean, I've had clients the discussion tool in planning their NDA. And so that means that the reviewers are actually looking at this document, not just the eData group. In my experience, and if somebody has a different experience, you need to let me know. But I'm going to also agree. NDA meeting is really late because you've already done most of your studies and you're just kind of wrapping stuff up. And it's been my experience every time that's when it's been happening because nobody knows about it. So, and the other part of the question, I have no idea what it was about. There was some other document that they used for communication. Did you catch that?
Can you read that part of it again, Maura?
Should the PhUSE extend the SDSP audience to the data reviewers, or should they continue to use the Type C meeting to discuss the data structure and format?
Well, you actually you put the SDRG as an appendix to your briefing document for a Type C meeting. It's going to become a communication tool, but it says in the conformance guide that they want you to start the SDSP early enough, like at the IND stage. But every time you update it, you're going to, it's at critical time points, like Jane had on the slide. And so when you do update it at pre-NDA, or you need to include it in that briefing document as an appendix so that you can talk about it again. So it's at key points through the development cycle.
Kevin, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Come to CSS. It's in March because you're going to learn a lot about this stuff.
This is like the place that people in our part of the industry need to be. It's where you get to every day rub shoulders with FDA reviewers, FDA administrators, and ask them questions. And sometimes they come up and ask you questions. They are starved for information about how the industry does stuff because they don't know. they don't have that experience.
Yeah. We have one last question back here, then we close.
So it's clear that we have to do phase 3 at SDM. So what's your opinion on phase 4 studies, the results of the planning and initial work and the
So she's asking whether or not we need to do legacy data conversions for their old phase 1 studies that may or may not have. Oh, new phase 1? Yeah. If you start a new study right now, it has to be an SDTM. Every single study. Every. And for non-clinical study, I think you should be doing SEND.
Yeah.
No, I think these days all of your phase 1 studies are going to go into the NDA.
They may not be pooled.
Right, they may not be in the data pool in the ISS, but they're going to be in the NDA. You have a regulatory obligation to submit that data.
Legacy studies are a different answer, but for all new studies, I think it's pretty clear.
All right, well, thank you, panelists. Thank you for coming, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime. Stay tuned.